Welcome to Troweling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. I'm Gary Byers. This is our own personal rock star, Dr. Stephen Collins, and we want to talk to you today about, well, we'll start with this particular rock. Now, this rock is a flint nodule. It was found in the palace at Tul El Hammam, where you are the director of the excavation. And it was found in the Middle Bronze Palace that was violently destroyed, and we think is in fact then the site of biblical Sodom, of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this particular rock is, Steve said it's sort of like a chicken egg. It's not too large, about the size of a chicken egg. Very large walnut maybe, I don't know. And it's really smooth on the outside, really smooth. Somebody went to some trouble to smooth this stone out. This is not like water smoothing, sitting in a creek or a river. This is really done. So what in the world do you think happened to that stone?
And in one of our previous episodes, we showed its mama and papa.
And this is baby bear.
This is baby. If this is a chicken egg, the one up from it is about the size of a goose egg, big goose egg, and the one up from that's almost the size of an ostrich egg.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite that big, but there seem to be denominated, and I think we actually have some smaller ones. We're going back through because we had no idea what some of these things were. You might say grinder stone, smoothing stone, pounder stone, but now that we have them all, they're just bigger than, they go big to small, and they're all the same shape. They're all made out of the same material. They're all smooth, made in exactly the same way, and they look denominated. They look like weights, a set of weights, and we think that's what they are. That's tentative, but that's it. This would be about a 10 shekel weight.
So a shekel was actually a denomination of weight, volume.
Very standardized, quite standardized across the Near East,
We
including
read about
Egypt and Mesopotamia and the Levant.
And we read about the word shekel in the Bible as a weight, and so this would be probably a 10 shekel weight. And you made a connection.
And by the way, silver is the medium of exchange.
Yes, not gold.
Not gold. Silver is pretty much it. By the way, in antiquity, silver was generally more expensive than gold.
Because?
It was rarer.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
More gold than silver. So this one you said was very possibly a 10 shekel weight, and then you connected that to a biblical account.
Well, there's a story in the Bible, of course, talking about Joseph, and remember when his brothers feigned his death. But really sold him off into slavery into Egypt.
Yep.
And the price of that to the Midianite traders was 20 shekels of silver.
Yes.
And of course, you get a weight like this, and you put an equal weight on the scale pans, you put an equal weight on the other side, and you weigh out your price. And that's how transactions were done in antiquity. Now, what's interesting about that is that Kenneth Kitchen and his group actually studied all the trade documents of the ancient Near East, including those from the Middle Bronze Age. And what's interesting is that the price of a slave in the Middle Bronze Age is 20 shekels.
So a number of places they found in historical documents and records, 20 shekels was what it cost to buy a slave, a human slave, in those days in the ancient Near Eastern world. And in a bunch of places, and here we find the same thing, same price, 20 pieces of shekel for Joseph.
For Joseph, in the Middle Bronze Age.
And so Joseph's time would relate to the Middle Bronze Age time for slaves.
Exactly. So if you were just looking at the story, the internal elements of the story itself, and not just the price of slaves, but many other things, you would have to put the story of Joseph in the Middle Bronze Age, in the second half, really, the Middle Bronze II period. Now, what's interesting about that, if you go to the next period, just into the Late Bronze Age, the time of Moses and the Mosaic Law, if a slave is killed and has to be replaced, the going price of a slave for the Mosaic Law a few hundred years later was 30 shekels. Now, what's interesting about that is not only does the Bible nail the right price for a slave in the Middle Bronze Age, it nails the right price of a slave in the Late Bronze Age during the time of Moses, because Kenneth Kitchen's group also looked at trade documents from the Late Bronze Age, and guess what the average price is for that? 30 shekels. 30 pieces of silver, 30 shekels. Now, if you go to the Iron Age, it's upwards of 120 shekels for a slave. So if the documentary hypothesis is true, if those who say, well, the Bible wasn't written way back there in the Bronze Age, it was mostly written in the Iron Age, or at least the Torah part, and it was written in the Iron Age, it's all made up by Judahite priests living in the 6th century BC, sometime around there, 7th, 6th century. Now, if that's true, you would think that an anachronism would slip into the text, and that they would have said, oh, Joseph was sold into slavery for 100 shekels or 120 shekels, because that's the price they knew. How is it that someone writing in the Iron Age could guess the price of the Middle Bronze Age slave trade, and in the Late Bronze Age slave trade, the right price of a slave in the time of Moses? How could they get that exactly right? Well, the fact is they couldn't. There's no way that would happen. These stories have to be authentic to the periods that they seem to be in terms of just face value, belief in the historicity of the text.
So you use the word anachronism. Chronism is from the Greek word chronos, from time. And so an anachronism is out of time, not time,
right?
Not the right time. So an anachronism is where something is said in the Bible, we're thinking of biblical text, something is said in the Bible and they say, well, that doesn't fit the time that the Bible says. And a synchronism is something synchro,
when they
same,
lock in,
when they fit together. And you pointed out that Moses wrote, the Bible says, and we believe Moses wrote the book of Genesis. And
or at least he collated it.
Oh, okay, yes, sir.
From earlier documents.
And we can, because Moses wasn't there for all of Genesis, and even
right.
the very first chapter of Exodus, he wasn't around for any of that. So he was the one that collated it, put it together. Good point. And so he put the right price for a slave in Joseph's time. And of course, when he wrote the laws for Israel, the Israelites at the Mount Sinai, he put the price of slaves for his time. And the thought is that this was written later, and you called it the documentary hypothesis, that was written later, and they would not have known that, and they would have used the price of slaves in their own time. That's right. What they knew. Yeah. They didn't know this ancient history.
So if the initials DH stands for the documentary hypothesis, based on historical synchronisms, and I would say archaeology and literary analysis, I would say we should change the DH to dumb hypothesis, not documentary hypothesis.
Aha.
That's what I would do. But anyway, let's do some more. Let's go back to the time of Abraham.
Yes.
When did Abraham live? If we're going to sync up Abraham with the ancient world, I always said if we could find the city of Sodom, get a really good set of ceramic and radiocarbon dates for the destruction of it, we would be able to nail the proper time for Abraham. Synchronize him.
Yes.
Do a historical synchronism and connect him up with the right world. Well, guess what? Our excavations at Tal Hammam we think we found Sodom.
Yes.
We're pretty sure about that. And it's destroyed and has lots of pottery. And the destruction of the city is datable because of the radiocarbon dates that we have gotten on carbonized material, including grain and short life samples. And guess what? That dates to about 1700 BC plus minus 50, somewhere around in there. So guess what? Now we have a synchronism. The Bible says Sodom was destroyed at a particular time in a particular way. And guess what? We can literally sync it up historically with the archaeology and say, yes, not only is the city there, but it was destroyed exactly in the same way the Bible describes it at exactly the right time.
So this, and we call those synchronisms from the ancient Near Eastern world outside the Bible and what the Bible says. And when we do archaeological work, we are looking for those synchronisms, those connections.
Yeah.
Now,
and by the way, we're not trying to prove the Bible true.
No.
As I've said many times,
I don't really do.
the Bible, it is factual. But we can demonstrate quite nicely the fact that the Bible stories fit into certain specific periods. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph belong in the Middle Bronze II period. Culturally, artifactually, materially, sociopolitically, religiously, everything about it belongs to that period. Everything about Moses and Joshua and those stories and the book of Judges mostly belongs in the late Bronze Age, because it fits that period exactly. Now let me show you that one. Of course, the most famous story associated with Moses is what?
The Exodus.
The Exodus. That's big. That's sort of the big pivotal event
in the Bible.
For the whole Old Testament. Now, if all of those terrible things, and I'd say there's 5 terrible things that happened to Egypt: plagues, 10 plagues, plundering, great loss of Egyptian military, loss of labor, loss of a lot of labor went out of Egypt, loss of Pharaoh. If those 5 things happened to Egypt, regardless of when you think it might have happened, if those things did happen to Egypt, even remotely as the Bible describes them, what would have happened to Egypt?
It would have collapsed as the world power.
It would have at least suffered terribly.
Yeah.
Now, in all this stretch of time, from the 15th century BC down to the 13th century BC, that people have suggested the time of the Exodus, there's only one period in all of that stretch where Egypt really collapsed, where the dynasty in charge crashed and burned.
So the Egyptian empire changed at that point.
Well, they only had an empire in the 18th dynasty. That was the only real empire period in Egyptian history.
Yep.
They lost the empire. It crashed and burned after the death, or upon the death, and immediately after the death of Thutmose IV. Right around 1400-ish BC. Now there's a little meandering going on about the Egyptian chronology. It could be up a little higher, down a little lower. But right there, about the time the Bible tells us that the Exodus should be happening, guess what? The 18th dynasty of Egypt is collapsing. Now, that's a synchronism.
Yes.
And so it's exactly what the Bible would predict. It's exactly what we find in the historical record. Now, to see all of that, of course, you have to check Egypt. You have to check everybody around. You have to check Mesopotamia. You have to check the Hittites. You have to look at everybody, how they're interacting and what's happening in the power grid sort of the ancient world. But that's the perfect time for it. So exactly as the Bible describes the collapse of Egypt, or would predict the collapse of Egypt based on those terrible events that happened to Egypt, guess what? The 18th dynasty collapses.
So those of us that would be Bible-focused people interested with the Bible, we would want to be connecting what happened in the ancient Near Eastern world and what the Bible says and seeing how they connect together. And if they do, it's a synchronism. If they don't, it's an anachronism. And over and over again, we find these synchronisms lining up very, very well.
And by the way, Egyptologists are always saying it's very mysterious why the 18th dynasty collapsed. Why did the 18th dynasty collapse? Nobody really has a handle on it. But guess what? If you really, really study it, what you will find is that they were suffering from plagues. Plagues were at least one of the components that brought down the 18th dynasty.
I read about that somewhere.
Yeah. And when you look at that, you go, I wonder where I've seen that before. And so, yes, exactly. The history of the 18th dynasty matches perfectly what we see described at the time of the Exodus.
Well, this show is called Troweling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. We're looking back in the ancient biblical world, and we're seeing how it lines up with the Bible. And we call those synchronisms. And it's amazing how well what the Bible says fits what we know from other ancient records and from archaeological finds. And it's a wonderful connection, a synchronism that says to us, we can trust the Bible for history. And if we can trust it for history, we can even trust it for eternity.
Exactly.
And we can trust it one day at a time.
And could I make a plug for a book?
Please do.
I wrote a book a few years ago called Let My People Go, using historical synchronisms to identify the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
Thutmose IV.
That's right. And so if you'd like to get a copy of that, you can find that on Amazon. It's really easy to get.
Okay, on Amazon. So get the book, get interested in the Bible, getting to understand archaeology, and you'll be surprised and amazed at how it all fits together. This is Troweling Down for the 21st Century, Biblical Archaeology. Thanks for watching.